What is going on, college basketball fans? Welcome back to another video, and today, of course, it is time for the updated Week 4 Bracketology Power 35 rankings. We do these every single week, along with a bunch of other college basketball content here on the channel. You don't want to miss it, so make sure you guys subscribe if you guys haven't already. Without further ado, let's get into these rankings. As always, giving you guys my entire Power 35, and before we go over why each team is where they are, why they moved up, why they moved down, let's just talk about how insane Feast Week was. Feast Week is always insane, and it always gives you a little bit of taste of March Madness. But this year, it really did feel like we were getting March on the week of Thanksgiving. Like, there were so many upsets, so many top 25, top 10, top 5 teams losing. It was so much fun. A ton of overtime games, a couple of buzzer beaters, so many crazy moments. It was a great week of basketball, and that is why you can tell there's a lot of teams that weren't ranked before. That is what the NR means, is not ranked. They weren't ranked for me last week, and there's a ton of teams moving up and down. There are not many teams that stayed in the same spot as they were last year, and what a crazy week. I also want to give a shout out to my West Virginia Mountaineers. As you guys know, if you guys are subscribers to the channel, I'm a WVU fan, and I don't think I put them in the Power 35 not one time last year. So to have them here at 34, you guys can let me know if they actually deserve it or if I'm being slightly biased to stick them in there at 34. But 2 insane wins over Gonzaga, over Arizona, in overtime. Arizona, I still think they're a decent team, but they're definitely not playing their best ball. But the win against Gonzaga really impressed me, and still went to overtime in the loss against Louisville. Very impressed with my Mountaineers, and I was at the Pitt game where they got destroyed on the road. And for this team to come back from that and beat Gonzaga, they got a lot of fight in them, and it's going to be a very fun season to watch this team. So I just want to give a shout out to them. But let's get into these actual rankings. And the only team in my top 10 who did not move up or down was my number 1 overall team, and that is the Auburn Tigers. I had Auburn as my number 1 team, I believe, since week 1. I think after they beat Houston, I think that they were my number 1 in week 1. I think preseason I had Kansas as my number 1, and then after week 1 I had Auburn, and ever since it's been Auburn at number 1. So looking, the number 1 team, one of the only teams to stay in the same spot, and the only team to stay in the same spot in the top 10, Auburn, not only staying at number 1, but doing so in impressive fashion, winning the Maui Invitational Tournament, beating Memphis in the final, who looks really good, beating Iowa State in the first round, which might have been their toughest opponent, I think it was. Looked fantastic all the way through. Auburn playing like the best team in the country right now. Janai Broome playing like the best player in the country right now. Number 2 is Kansas Jayhawks. Kansas, I had them at number 4 last week in the last few weeks, but they got to jump up. Another very impressive win this week over the Duke Blue Devils, getting it done. And this team is loaded. I've said it last week and the last few weeks. I think this team is one of my favorites to win the national championship. But I feel like they're not even playing, and it's kind of weird to say this because they're undefeated and they have very good wins over North Carolina, over Duke, over Michigan State, I believe. They are playing fine, but I feel like they haven't reached their top potential, which is saying something. That's scary. Kansas can get even better than they already are here at number 2. Number 3, I got Tennessee. Tennessee, they deserve it. Now, do I think that they will stay here all year, and do I think that they are the 3rd favorite to win the national championship? Probably not necessarily, but this is like they deserve it to be here, and they've proved that they need to be here. They definitely deserve to be top 5. I got them in here at number 3. Chaz Lehner has been playing awesome. They got some good key wins already this season, still undefeated. They're here at number 3. Number 4, we got Marquette, and Marquette has been playing awesome. They look like they might be the best team in the Big East. I mean, after what we saw from UConn, We'll talk about UConn at the end because they're all the way out of the rankings now after being top 10 last week. So we'll talk about them at the end. But Marquette is playing really good basketball. Cam Jones, like I mentioned earlier, Janai Broome looks like he's the best player in the country. The number 2 best player in the country might be Cam Jones for Marquette. He's been playing awesome. And yeah, Marquette's looking good. They're here at number 4, still undefeated. Another undefeated team, you got Kentucky, and really Tennessee, Marquette, Kentucky, 3 through 5. I feel like those are pretty interchangeable, but they all definitely deserve to be top 5 teams right now. Kentucky's got a good win over Duke already this season. Playing pretty good. They got what looks to be a pretty deep team filled with a lot of really good guards. I like this Kentucky team. They're here at number 2. And all 3 of these teams jumping up 2 spots from where they were last week. Number 6, we have Iowa State, and I had them at number 11 last week, just outside the top 10, because they have not played anybody that great yet. So I wanted them to prove themselves before I put them back into the top 10. And even though they did lose to Auburn in a very close game, they came back from that, won 2 more games in the Maui, finished 2-1 in the Maui with their only loss to my number 1 team, the Auburn Tigers, in a close one. I feel like they've done enough to jump back into the top 10, jump up 5 spots here from a number 11 to number 6. I think they are going to be dangerous this season. Number 7, we got the Wisconsin Badgers, and Wisconsin jumping up 7 spots here from 14 to 7. A lot of people ahead of them lost this week. I mean, a lot of people lost this week. There were a ton of games in the tournaments, but Wisconsin's still undefeated, and they won their tournament and beat a really good Pitt team, and before that, a pretty good Central Florida team. So I think Wisconsin looking pretty good. They do have a win over Arizona as well this year, which doesn't look as great anymore, but still, Wisconsin playing good. John Tunji, wow, who would have expected that to be one of the best transfer portal pickups this season? Number 8, we do have Oregon jumping up 18 spots, getting solid wins over San Diego State, Alabama, and Texas A&M in 1 week, winning the first ever Players Era Festival. And I believe, I'm not sure exactly how it works, but their whole roster, I'm pretty sure, gets a share of some NIL money for that tournament. So a pretty cool event. They were able to win it, got some money. You know, people call it questionable goaltending there at the end of regulation of the Oregon-Alabama game. It was very close to call. So, I mean, either way, I can't put that on the refs. They reviewed it. Was just going to go with the call on the court. Whatever they called was going to stand because it was one of the closest goaltendings I've ever seen. Whether it hit the backboard before Alabama blocked it or not, it was like simultaneously. So Oregon definitely deserved that win. Went into overtime, still was able to close it out and win that game. Oregon jumping up 18 spots. I think they were at 26 last week, all the way up to number 8. Number 9, we got Gonzaga, and I didn't want to drop them too far. They lost to my team, West Virginia. They definitely had their points in the game where they were controlling the game. They had their opportunities to run away with it, but West Virginia just kept crawling back in it and forced overtime after being down 5 with 22 seconds left. Gonzaga had it, up 5, 22 seconds left to regulation. It got to overtime. They just could not get it back. And after that, they went on to beat Indiana and go 2-1 in the battle for Atlantis. So Gonzaga, I don't believe they should fall too far. They had a true road win over San Diego State already this year, which is looking a lot better now as well. I think Gonzaga still deserves to be top 10. They are dropping, though, 7 spots from number 2 down to number 9. Number 10, we do have the Purdue Boilermakers, and Purdue, they got a solid win over Ole Miss this week. Ole Miss looks to be better than I thought, but Purdue jumps back into the top 10 from number 13 up to number 10, and the way Purdue was able to come back at the end of that game, I actually had a bet for this game that was Purdue money line, so I was actually pretty ecstatic that they were able to win the way that they were at the end of that one against Ole Miss. But Purdue jumping up 3 spots into the top 10. Their only loss this year is on the road to Marquette, and that's a tough place to play. True road games, very hard to play in. They got a good win in Mackey over Alabama already this year, another good win over Ole Miss. Purdue back in the top 10 at number 10. Number 11, we got Pitt jumping up 12 spots. Not only is their only loss to Wisconsin and that blowout win against West Virginia just looking even better now, but they went on the road to Columbus to play a true road game at Ohio State, was able to put up a ton of points, over 90 points, and hit a buzzer beater for the win, and Pitt stays just with 1 loss. That is going to be a huge non-con win. Already a couple of those this year against LSU, West Virginia, and Ohio State. Pitt, definitely the third, a top 3 team in the ACC. Right now, I have them as my top-ranked team in the ACC, with Duke and North Carolina falling. Number 12, one of the biggest jumpers, maybe I think the biggest jumper of the week, the Oklahoma Sooners. And before this week, I do have, an excuse for not having them ranked last week. They have not played anyone of significance before they entered the Battle for Atlantis tournament, but that is how you get on my radar. Win 3 games in a row in the Bahamas and win the Battle for Atlantis tournament over Louisville in the championship. Oklahoma undefeated so far this year, beating Arizona, beating Providence, beating Louisville in the championship, and Oklahoma is number 12. Is this finally the year Porter Moser gets his Oklahoma team on track and back into the tournament as a threat? Number 13, we do have the Florida Gators jumping up 9 spots. They won a little tournament, a 4-team tournament. They beat Wake Forest, and then in the championship, they beat down on Wichita State. And that's a good Wichita State team that I thought was going to be in these rankings this week until Florida beat them by over 30 points. So Florida looking really good, undefeated so far. They're up 9 spots here at number 13. Number 14, we got Alabama, and at number 15, we got Duke. I want to talk about these 2 teams together because Alabama actually had a pretty decent week. They beat Houston in overtime and then lost to Oregon in overtime. I don't hold that too much against them. I just think that they did have to drop a little bit for that loss, and that is their second loss on the season, but they played a tough schedule so far. I do expect Alabama for sure, and maybe Duke, but Alabama for sure, I do expect them to jump back into the top 10 as soon as next week or within the next 2 weeks. I'm pretty high on their team this year as a whole. They're very deep, have a very good offensive team. Duke, I expect them to kind of hang anywhere from 15 to 8. I don't think Duke's going to fall much lower than 15, though, throughout the entire season. I think Duke's a really good team, and I don't expect them to jump up. But they did take a loss to Kansas, so they did have to drop 5 spots here to number 15. Number 16, we do have Cincinnati jumping up 3 spots purely because teams ahead of them were losing, and they are still an undefeated team. Cincinnati is one of those rare teams that, even after Feast Week, haven't really played anybody that great yet. So they're kind of untested, but they look really good. Can't put them any higher than this, though, even though they are undefeated. Can't put them any higher than 16 until they play a better team. Baylor, staying at number 17. The only thing they did this week, I believe, was blow out some team that they were just supposed to. So those wins don't really get you too far in my rankings. They're staying the same at 17. Number 18, we got Memphis jumping up 14 spots, defeating UConn in overtime, defeating Michigan State, and only losing to Auburn. So a 2-1 week in the Maui Invitational, and your only losses to my number 1 team. That is how you get on my radar. Memphis was in the 30s for me. I believe they were 32 or so. last week and jumping all the way up to 18 here, jumping up 14 spots. Tyrese Hunter. I knew PJ Haggerty was going to be an issue for almost every team this year, but Tyrese Hunter, the way that he is shooting the three ball, this may be one of the best backcourts, if not the best backcourt in the entire nation, and I think this is going to be Penny Hardaway's best team that he's had so far at Memphis. I'm very excited to watch them play and continue to play this season. Number 19, we got Drake jumping up 2 spots, still undefeated. They won the Charleston Classic, but that was last week, so that got them to 21, and they're up to 19 this week, still undefeated. Number 20, we got Georgia staying in the same spot. They didn't do anything except, beat up on a team that they were supposed to, but they got solid wins this year over St. John's, over North Florida. North Florida win doesn't look as good anymore, but, they beat them. North Florida still might get the ASUN bid to the tournament. Number 21, we do have Arizona State, and Arizona State was not ranked for me last week, but they've got a couple of very impressive wins against 2 of the better mid-majors in the country, and that is against St. Mary's and against New Mexico, and they got another really good mid-major win earlier in the season against Grand Canyon. So those are 3 solid wins. They played Gonzaga close in the Kennel. Tough place to play. That is their only loss on the season. And Arizona State is here at 21. And I would never thought that this team would be ranked in the Power 35 after losing by 50 in the preseason in a charity game against Duke this preseason. But here they are with their only loss to Gonzaga and back-to-back solid wins against New Mexico and St. Mary's. Number 22, we got Illinois, and Illinois got a really good win this week against Arkansas. That was a very solid win. They played Alabama somewhat close earlier last week, but that was their first really good win, was against Arkansas, and they're jumping up 16 spots for it. They were on my teams to watch last week, about 38 or so, and they're jumping up a lot because they proved it to me. They hung in there with Alabama for the most part, and then they went and beat Arkansas, who was a top 20 team for me last week. So that was very impressive to me, and that's all I need. I need teams to prove that they are a top 25 team, and to me, Illinois did that this week. Number 23, we got Ole Miss. They are not ranked last week, but like Illinois, they proved to me that they deserve to be ranked. They did not beat Purdue, but they almost did. They probably should have if they didn't blow it, and they played them really close. They looked the part, man, and we'll see what comes of it. I believe that they have a couple of better teams that they will be facing here coming up. So we will see this Chris Beard-led team be tested more this coming week. San Diego State at 24, they had a really good Players Era Festival tournament. Looking pretty good. 2-1 with their only loss to Oregon. Not too bad at all. And man, that has to suck if you are like a Boise, a New Mexico, Utah State. If you're a fan of any team in the Mountain West, you're like, okay, San Diego State's supposed to have a down year this year. This might be our year to finally take the league. And then San Diego State comes out into the Players Era Festival and puts on those performances, upsetting Houston. I mean, come on. I know Mountain West fans are like, here we go again. But San Diego State back in the top 25-24. Number 25, also not ranked last week, Michigan State. I believe they were very impressive in the Players Era, the Maui Invitational. Was able to pick up some solid wins, and I believe their only loss was to Memphis, and they were able to pick up a win over North Carolina, which really impressed me that they were able to win that game. I thought North Carolina was going to win that for sure, but the whole Maui Invitational was just so competitive. Michigan State really impressed me. They're here at number 25. Only losses are to Memphis and to Kansas earlier in the season. St. John's here at number 26. Didn't really do much this week, but they had to drop 2 spots because I believe a couple of teams were just looked better than them and deserved to be higher. So St. John's had to drop a little bit down to 26. Number 27, Texas A&M went 1-1 in their tournament with a win over Creighton and a loss to Oregon. So a pretty solid week, but then they go and beat Rutgers later in the week as well, which is a solid win. Texas A&M, I didn't believe they deserved to be too much higher because they did lose to Oregon as well, but they did get 2 solid wins. So I got my eye on them. They do have 2 losses on the season already, 1 to Central Florida and 1 to Oregon, so they can definitely move higher, but for now they're staying put here at number 27. Number 28, we got Texas jumping up 1 spot. Didn't do too much this week, but they have been pretty solid so far with their only loss to Ohio State. Number 29, we got Vanderbilt jumping up just 1 spot. Kind of the same thing, didn't do too much this week. They had their Feast Week tournament the week prior where they lost into the championship game of the Charleston Classic to Drake. Number 30, we do have North Carolina dropping 22 spots. One of my, is this our highest? Well, no, not our highest faller because we had some teams fall completely out of the rankings. But North Carolina going 1-2 on the week with a win over Dayton in a close one. Lost to Michigan State, lost to Auburn, and a loss to Michigan State. But you know, those are 2 very solid teams. It was a close one against Michigan State. They were able to win a close one against Dayton, but they do have 3 losses on the season. And even though I do believe they are a good team, that's why I kept them in the rankings here at 30. They will have chances to climb back in, but they had to drop after a 1-2 week. Number 31, not ranked last week. We do have Louisville going 2-1 on the season, or not on the season, 2-1 on the week with wins over West Virginia, wins over Indiana, but a loss to Oklahoma in the Battle for Atlantis championship. If they would have won that Battle for Atlantis, I don't think they'd be as high as Oklahoma at number 12 because they do have 1 loss on the season, whereas Oklahoma is undefeated, but they would definitely be top 20 if they did get that win over Oklahoma. But they do have 2 losses on the season, 1 to Oklahoma and a blowout loss to Tennessee at home. But I do believe they are a top 35 team in the league right now. Chucky Hepburn was going bananas in the Battle for Atlantis, not only offensively but defensively, getting steals and playmaking. He has been a force, and they are up here at number 31. Number 32, we do have Houston. Rough week for Houston, taking 2 losses, 1 to San Diego State in overtime and 1 to Alabama in overtime. I decided to keep them in the rankings, even like North Carolina. They do have 3 losses on the season, 1 to Auburn, 1 to San Diego State, and 1 to Alabama. But I do believe they are a good team. You know, 2 losses. They are both in overtime. They're here still at 32, but they did have to drop 20 spots from last week. Number 33, we do have Arkansas. They had to drop 15 spots. They did take a loss this Illinois, and that was a one that I believe Arkansas really needed to kind of keep them in the top 20 and maybe even get into the top 15. But this Arkansas team, just not the best 3-point shooting team. And I believe if they can get better at that, they can definitely be a top 15 team. But I expect them to stay around the 20 to 30 range across most of the season. Number 34, talked about them at the beginning of the video. So proud of my boys. West Virginia cracking the Dayton Power 35 and wins over Gonzaga, wins over Arizona this week. An overtime loss to Louisville. 3 back-to-back overtime games in a row. Was a crazy week as a WVU fan watching these games. A lot of stress, but they played amazing. They're here at number 34. Only losses are to Louisville in overtime and a blowout loss to Pitt so far this year. And number 35, staying the same, is the Dayton Flyers. Yes, they did go 1-2 on the week, I believe. But the way they battled in the Maui Invitational, I just could not... I couldn't kick them out of the rankings. They were keeping every game so close, man. They deserve to be a top 35 team. And these are the power rankings. And we have teams with 2 or 3 losses in the rankings still. I believe Dayton still deserves their spot here and holding it here at number 35. They played in the Maui Invitational, got to play some top-tier competition. They showed that they belong. They're here at number 35. Teams to watch. teams to watch. We got DePaul. I had to put DePaul as my top team to watch because who would have thought the Blue Demons would be undefeated up to this point? And I believe one of only 2 undefeated teams in the Big East left. It's just them and Marquette. So pretty insane there. BYU did take a loss to Ole Miss. That is another reason Ole Miss got ranked. Forgot to mention that. But I still think BYU is going to be a really good team and a sleeper in the Big 12. Rhode Island is undefeated out of the A-10. The A-10 is very strong this year. One of the strongest mid-major conferences in the country for sure. Loyola. Not talking about Loyola Marymount, and definitely not Loyola Maryland. This is Loyola Chicago. They are still undefeated. Another A-10 team there to mention. Michigan. Michigan got a solid win against Xavier this week. Look out for them. They kicked Xavier completely out of the rankings this week for me. Columbia. Columbia looks like they're going to be a pretty good mid-major this year. Undefeated in the Ivy League. Look out for Columbia. Texas Tech. Texas Tech took a loss to St. Joseph's, and ever since they haven't been back in my rankings, but they are in the teams to watch. St. Mary's took a tough loss this week to Arizona State, which bumped them out of the rankings, but I'm still keeping my eye on them. Maryland is 7-1 with their only loss to Marquette at home. They look decent. You know, they got a good win over Villanova. I guess you can call that a good win against Villanova. But, you know, they're 7-1. I got my eye on Maryland. UConn. Let's talk about UConn. 0-3 this week and 0-3 in the Maui Invitational. And I could understand losing to Memphis. You know, yes, it was an upset when it happened. But Memphis has much, much higher, better guard play than UConn has. That's just a fact. But then the loss to Colorado. That was... No, Colorado is not a good team. UConn can say, well, Colorado is probably a tournament. No, they're not a tournament team. That was a horrible loss that you guys should not have, you know, that should not have happened. And then to lose the third one handily. That just could not happen. And UConn, you know, I seen Dan Hurley was talking about they're not going to go to another Feast Week tournament. They're not going to do this. They're playing 3 games in a row. It's just horrible. The rest were horrible. Whining, complaining. I know. I seen it. To me, that's just awful. You know, I think that these tournaments are great for college basketball, and for him to be that upset over officiating and I feel like after the Memphis game, it just killed the entire team's trip, and they were done with it from that point forward. So we'll see if they do bounce back. You know, I'm definitely going to keep watching them and, you know, see if they're able to turn it around and get back into the rankings. But for now, there's no way anybody could make the case to me that they deserve to be in the top 35 after the performances that they put on in that Maui Invitational. Looked awful, especially against Colorado and especially against Dayton. That was horrible, man. But yeah, guys, let me know what you guys think about the Power 35 for Week 4. Who should be higher? Who should be lower? Who got snubbed? Let me know down below who got snubbed from the Power Rankings. And yeah, guys, expect more content here on the channel and expect these weekly rankings every single week. So yeah, guys, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching.